What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here, and back to review The Rivals of Amziah King, a movie which I like so much it has officially pushed all competitors aside and is now my favorite movie of 2026 that I've seen so far. And obviously, we still have a few more months to go, but if you have not yet heard of this movie, not to worry, because I hadn't heard about it until a couple days ago. I was down at the Angelina last week and I saw this big giant poster for it, and I was like, I have no idea what that's about, but I love Matthew McConaughey, I love Kurt Russell. Let's take it for a spin. And I'm almost worried about doing this review and kind of overselling it or overhyping it, because I went into this movie with not only low expectations, but zero expectations. I saw the trailer one time, promptly forgot about it, and so I went into this movie completely and totally cold. But it was one of those rare experiences where within like 20 or 30 seconds of the movie starting, I was like, oh shit. I really like this. Like, I was already on the movie's wavelength, started getting chills shortly thereafter. And I decided to play a little game over the course of the movie where I would count how many times the movie managed to give me chills, up my arms, up my back and neck, etc. and so forth. And I lost track. And not only did I lose track of how many times the movie gave me chills, as I was walking home from the theater and just thinking about the movie, I started getting chills again. Now, I'm not going to say this movie's flawless, and I'm not going to say it's perfect, because in the middle of the movie, it sags, and it sags considerably. So much so I was like, oh no, it was so good, like, don't wreck it. But luckily, by the end of the movie, it sticks the landing, totally redeems itself. So at 2 hours and 10 minutes, it's probably overly long, or maybe they could have revisited the middle portion of the movie in the editing room. But the reality is, this movie gave me more laughs and more heartwarming moments and more chills and more great character beats, along with some really hardcore brutality that I was not expecting at all, where the movie just managed to shoot right to the top of my top 10 list for the year. But who knows, maybe I'll get surprised by more movies later this summer or early in the fall, because I love it when a movie comes out of nowhere, a late summer surprise, and just completely blindsides you and catches you off guard. So maybe now's the time to tell you who made this thing and what it's about. So here's the official premise from IMDb. Amziah King, beekeeper, musician, and anchor of his community, reunites with former foster daughter Kateri after many years apart and fends off threats to his honey business. And that'll more or less get the job done, because I'm very reluctant to give away any spoilers of any kind, because I know the movie's going into limited release today and it goes into wide release next week. Toward the end of this video, I might have to go into some very spoiler-light territory just to make a point about some of my grievances toward the movie, but I'll give you a big, fat, juicy warning ahead of time, as well as a time code below, just to make sure I don't spoil anything for you. But the movie was written and directed by a filmmaker that I was totally unfamiliar with, Andrew Patterson, but for some reason he writes under the pen name James Montague. But for whatever reason, he just likes to have a little air of mystery when he's writing his screenplays. But I can say this with absolute certainty: whatever movie he makes in the future, I'll be first in line day one. And he's got one other movie to his name, which was self-financed, which I've never heard of and I've never seen, but I'll amend that probably over the weekend. The Vast of Night from 2019. I don't know if that movie can compare at all to The Rivals of Amziah King. I don't know if he leveled up or if he came roaring out of the gate, but yeah, this filmmaker has absolutely got my attention. And what it reminded me of quite a bit when I was watching it was the mid-late 90s, where the indie and foreign film craze really took hold in American culture, where it seemed like every couple of months there'd be some groundbreaking new movie. You're like, oh my God, I've never seen anything like this before, but I'll definitely be watching this filmmaker's work in the future. And I felt the exact same way while watching this movie. I've never seen a movie like this quite before. It's basically a movie that's a love song to beekeepers, country music or bluegrass or a mix of the two, and organized crime, or kind of like rural, redneck, shit kicker organized crime. And I say shit kicker as a term of endearment. I've got nothing but love and affection for the two-bit redneck peckerwoods that have been featured throughout film history, and I wish we saw them far more frequently. But we live in an era where so many movies and so many shows are like, oh, these writers like these movies and like these shows, and they're just paying homage to them or just stealing outright. But I can kind of see where you're going before we even get 5 minutes into the story. This movie, I had no idea where I was going. I had no idea what to expect. So much so that it was even frustrating at times in terms of some of the story decisions they made. But once again, that's due to the sagging point in the middle. But don't worry. If you feel yourself getting frustrated in the middle, just be patient. The movie will circle back around and blow your mind all over again. And in spite of growing up in the South, I'm not going to pretend as if I'm some giant connoisseur for country music or bluegrass. Although if you put in some old school Hank Williams or some Johnny Cash or whatever, I will definitely sit back and tap my foot appreciatively. But when I got home from watching this movie, the first thing I did was download the one available song, Quill, that is already available on the iTunes store. And I was like, why can't I get the whole goddamn soundtrack? I want the whole soundtrack. And when I can get the whole soundtrack, I will. But Quill is used, how can I say this without spoilers? it's used very dramatically and with major payoffs and dividends later in the movie, because this movie, for like the first third, what's interesting about this flick is how it's basically like a character-driven art house drama where it's all about atmosphere and setting. It's all about people who love music and love making barbecue and brisket and that sort of thing. But there's not a lot of plot going on. And then the organized crime element really kicks in and becomes more of like a police procedural or thriller, even though it does hang on to the atmosphere and the style of the earlier portions. But initially, when I heard the song Quill in the context of the movie, I thought to myself, this is just going to be yet another jam session that's featured so prominently throughout the earlier part of the movie. Because in this story, whether you're talking about Matthew McConaughey or the people he works with as beekeepers, all of them are musicians. They all either sing or have an instrument, or in some cases play multiple instruments. And they'll go to fast food restaurants, or at the drop of a hat, at any given time, they'll just call their friends and be like, bring your guitar over, like we're going to throw down. And so I thought this song Quill was just going to be one of those scenes. What I did not know was that it would, once again, I got to be vague when it comes to spoilers. What I did not know is that it would have such an emotional impact later in the movie for reasons that I cannot elaborate upon at this time. And so I haven't felt this much pure, raw emotion while watching a movie in a long time. There are plenty of movies that I can enjoy on an analytical level where I can kind of dissect them and I'm kind of at an objective arm's length distance admiring what they accomplish. But with the Rivals of Amziah King, I was right in there. I was right there in the movie, just seated back. I was in this world. And it's a world that just never gets explored because, rural kind of hillbilly environments oftentimes get neglected by or totally ignored by filmmakers who are either from New York or from Los Angeles. But Andrew Patterson, let's see where this guy's from. I think he's either from Alabama or Oklahoma, or maybe they shot it in Alabama. But it says here he lives in Oklahoma, and he started working in the movie business as a projectionist as a sophomore in high school before founding his own production company in Oklahoma City, producing commercials as well as promo shorts for the local basketball team, Oklahoma City Thunder. Holy smokes. And it says here that his first movie, The Vast of Night, was rejected by 18 film festivals before finally premiering at the 2019 Slamdance Film Festival. That's incredible. But obviously with this movie, when it comes to the cast and crew and the budget, he's leveling up into the big time, because while like the feature attraction of this movie, or like the lead or the central protagonist, if you just watch the trailer, you're going to think to yourself, oh, this is going to be Matthew McConaughey versus Kurt Russell, let the bullets start flying. But the real star of this movie is Angelina LookingGlass as the character Kateri, and I think you're going to start seeing a lot more of her in the not-so-distant future. Right now, she's appearing in this show called Dark Winds, where she appears in a couple episodes. Initially in the movie, I was thinking to myself, oh, well, she seems a little inexperienced, or maybe a little amateur, a little rough around the edges, but she's very likable. And she's attractive without being like overtly beautiful. But initially I was thinking to myself, she's surrounded by so many charismatic, larger-than-life personalities. She was being kind of swallowed up by the movie, because Matthew McConaughey, we've been watching him in movies since Dazed and Confused, 1993 or 4? And obviously it's this giant filmography. And Kurt Russell, he's a true living legend who's been delighting us in movies for 50 years at this point. So it's easy to kind of get blasted off the screen when you're surrounded by all these icons from the movie biz. By the end of the movie, Angelina LookingGlass absolutely comes into her own. I was like, God damn, girl, you've got the goods. You're pretty, you're talented, you're likable, you're a good actress. You've got multiple dimensions and qualities to your style. I look forward to seeing whatever the future might hold for moving down the road.
I got a big haul coming up, and I could use some help.
Do you think you'd be able to do it?
I know you'd be able to do it. Follow me.
Where this movie really thrives and really sets it apart is with the amount of detail we get about the lifestyles of beekeepers. And of course, you can watch the Jason Statham action movie, The Beekeeper. I believe there's a Beekeeper 2 coming our way. Matthew McConaughey doesn't throw a lot of high kicks or break a lot of necks in this movie.
Everyone, need your attention, please. I'm going to burn this place to the ground.
But what Matthew McConaughey and his team of co-workers remind me of in this movie is how they're a little bit like a band of like semi-outlaws, where they might have a legit job during the day, like, delivering propane to businesses or whatever. But at night, perhaps they go out with like a trailer, and maybe like they'll steal honey back that's been stolen from them. But they live right on the fringe, right on the outside of society. But they're just absolutely delightful, colorful characters. Where once again, all of them are either like musicians or thieves or just diehard beekeepers, where I've never seen a collection of characters that's so instantly likable. And some of them have a little legal expertise, and some of them have some other expertise. But very early on in this movie, and once again, I got to be very careful about spoilers, the movie reminds you this is not just going to be like a way of life kind of artsy-fartsy movie where it has no plot whatsoever. There's a moment of abrupt and sudden, like I won't say violence, but a moment of sudden and abrupt carnage where you're like, whoa, where the hell did that come from? It's so abrupt and also so funny and pays so many dividends in terms of humor throughout the movie but it put me on edge. I realized, you know what, this is not just going to be a movie where you're seeing like a lot of like beautiful sunsets while people just hang out and watch the bees float around. There's an element of danger at all times, even during the relatively peaceful sequences where Matthew McConaughey and his former foster daughter, played by Angelina, LookingGlass, even the scenes where he's teaching her about his profession. When you have two actors that are just covered by a swarm of bees gathering up on the arm and chest and that sort of thing, it's like, it's fucking terrifying. It's almost like a scene out of Jackass where like, you know, how many bee stings can you handle in 5 minutes or less before you have an outright heart attack? And for me, the best scene of the movie by far, and I got to be careful about spoilers, but it's almost like they're the Ghostbusters called in to solve a crisis involving bees. And somehow I went down a rabbit hole a couple of years ago on YouTube where I went through like this like phase for a couple of days. Just the algorithm kept feeding me these videos where people would be called into a business or a home or whatever where there was just like a bee infestation. It's like, how do we extract the bees without killing them, and how do we get them out? And like basically, yeah, like harvest the honey, etc. and so forth. But basically like ripping open walls or ripping up floors and getting these giant nests out that basically are just like, you know, like 10 by 20 feet in some cases. But those videos were absolutely fascinating. And the scene in this movie, it's got humor, it's got danger, it's got excitement, it's got thrills. And for a movie that's relatively like a character-driven way of life movie, it does employ some interesting kind of high-stakes thrills and chills involving like car chases and action. And obviously, when you're making a movie like this on a very limited budget, you gotta use your special effects budget sparingly. But it's nice to see some good old-fashioned rednecks getting in their pickup trucks and just raising hell. There's one scene in this movie where the action was so thrilling and so abrupt and so exciting, I just started cracking up and just clapping while I was watching it. I should also acknowledge that in the theater where I saw this movie, there was one other person in the entire theater, and as I was walking, I was like, hell of a movie, and he was like, ah, and I kind of caught him off guard. But let's just say in Lower Manhattan in New York, I don't know if the audience is there for this kind of movie, but I'm thrilled that the Angelica decided to distribute this movie in limited release, and I hope that the movie will enjoy some success as it goes into wider release next week. So going into this movie, most people are going to know more or less what to expect from Matthew McConaughey and Kurt Russell. Like, you know, once again, they've got giant filmographies. We know what they bring to the table, but the supporting cast, the ensemble cast in this movie, is absolutely first rate. Now, maybe I've sung the praises of Angelina LookingGlass enough at this point, but I got to give a shout out to some of the other actors in this movie, all of whom just brought their A game and just made this, they all just like a rising tide lifting all boats. Every single one of them plays their role in bringing this movie up to its very, very high levels. So Jake Horowitz, I'd seen him in some other movies, but I think when you watch this movie, you'll think to yourself, holy shit, he could be the next Matthew McConaughey. He's got that kind of outlaw, rural, redneck charm where he's kind of half bandit, half beekeeper, very resourceful, very, very reliable. He's incredible in this. Scott Shepherd is absolutely fantastic. Perhaps he hams it up just a little bit with the accent that he employs, but nonetheless, he does a very good job. Tony Revolori, who most people will remember as Flash Thompson from the Spider-Man movies, he plays quite a different role in this. And let's just say that he's involved in easily the most shocking and funny scene of 2026, where I'm still laughing anytime I think about it. But it's a crazy scene, but it's also his reaction to the scene, which makes it so enjoyable. Rob Morgan is really good in this. Rob Morgan, I first saw him in Winning Time, where he plays the father of Magic Johnson. But he plays kind of like the consigliere in this movie to Amziah King, who's trying to always keep him out of trouble and keep him from saying things that he shouldn't say. Cole Sprouse is really good in this. Yeah, everybody's good in this. And you can just tell it must have been so much goddamn fun to make this movie, because every scene is either got like some great like outdoor exploration or crazy music or great food. You're going to want to sprint to the closest barbecue joint after watching this movie. There's a scene where they have like a potluck dinner during this concert during the movie, where everybody brings whatever, whether it's like green bean casserole or brisket or whatever. I was drooling and salivating because New York has one or two barbecue joints which are fine, But I do miss kind of like your down and dirty, inexpensive, just good old-fashioned barbecue places that you might find in a state like North Carolina, where I spent much of my childhood. Where what gets confused, or people get confused by in New York, is that if you're opening a barbecue restaurant, you don't make it expensive. Barbecue is meant to be inexpensive food for kind of like blue-collar people, and you just make it with like the best ingredients you can. But goddamn, as I was watching this movie, I was just like, I was lusting after a good old-fashioned barbecue sandwich with some coleslaw on it, maybe some macaroni and some greens on the side. But if you've ever enjoyed barbecue in your life, prepare to get insanely hungry while watching this movie. Now, I've been saying a lot of really complimentary things about this movie, but let's tap the brakes a bit and offer some criticisms, just so that when people justifiably accuse me of overhyping the movie, I can at least say, well, I did criticize this and I did criticize that. I felt pure, unbridled joy throughout much of this movie, but it is not without its flaws, as some people say, or that's just another way of saying it has flaws. I mean, not without its flaws. It's very verbose, but for whatever reason, it sounds cooler than saying a movie has flaws. But Matthew McConaughey, this is probably his best performance in a decade. However, because you can tell he's having so much goddamn fun making this movie, playing the mandolin and just acting like the world's most lovable redneck, there are times where perhaps he leans into his rural persona just a little bit too much, and you might be saying to yourself, well, wait a second, haven't we been seeing him do that for like 30 years?
That's what I love about these high school girls, man. I get older, they stay the same age.
Yes, they do.
This movie opens the door to him basically having like no restraints whatsoever, and it's an absolutely like infectious, charismatic performance for the great majority of the movie. But there'll be a time or two where you're like, dude, just a little restraint. Like sometimes less is more when it comes to acting, and sometimes that's the director's job. But obviously, if you have an inexperienced director and a very experienced star, you're probably gonna just let him do whatever the hell he wants. But Kurt Russell, yeah, I can't remember a single moment where he seems excessive or over the top. Kurt Russell, goddamn, like the world does not deserve Kurt Russell. He's just given us so many astonishing performances over the years.
You know what old Jack Burton always says at a time like this?
Who?
Jack Burton. Me. Old Jack always says, what the hell?
And here he's loving playing the bad guy, because the world of organized crime, when it comes to farmers and beekeepers, it's a completely unusual kind of subsection of American culture that just never gets explored in movies. And Kurt Russell definitely seizes the opportunity to show us something very special. And I've got one very minor criticism when it comes to the soundtrack for the film, because as much as I love the music, and as much as I found myself tapping my foot relentlessly during all those musical sequences, I have one bone to pick when it comes to the music in this movie, because there's a very clear and obvious pivot in the soundtrack. Anytime a song begins, like a couple of people are hanging out in the kitchen and they pick up their instruments, suddenly it transitions into studio quality. And for a movie that's so gritty and grounded and authentic, to suddenly have like pristine, studio perfect, like crystal clear music, it's kind of jarring. Like, well, the music's beautiful and I'm loving it, but it doesn't sound like y'all are actually playing it. It makes it a little bit more difficult to suspend one's disbelief. And I get it. It's much easier to get like a great sounding track in a studio where you have total control over your environment, as opposed to like a kitchen where like the acoustics of the audio might be terrible. But I feel like at least one or two scenes involving musicians, they should have made a genuine, sincere effort to try to have the music be recorded then and there on the set, which admittedly is incredibly challenging to do, which is why so few people do it when they make a musical. But that was one thing I noticed. I was like, I love the music. It's what's giving me chills. However, as filmmaker Robert Meyer Burnett likes to say, it breaks the verisimilitude of the overall movie-going experience. But the most obvious flaw from my point of view is the structure of the movie. And I think I'm going to be able to address the flaw without any spoilers whatsoever. So no spoiler warning is needed. But let's just say the earlier part of the movie places very heavy emphasis on setting, atmosphere, tone, just like the richness of character and texture of this environment they're exploring. And then the latter two-thirds are very plot-driven. The transition from the kind of art house part of the movie to the plot-driven part of the movie is very clumsy, very abrupt, and it really takes a long time either for the movie to reset or for the audience to reset, or both. It's almost like you're stepping into a different movie. It's like when you go to a film festival and you watch a shorts program part. Basically, when they program shorts at a festival, they should just program the shorts like one short before every feature, but they'll usually put like 20 shorts in a row on the shorts program, and after every short, you have to kind of you have to kind of emotionally reset, cleanse your palate, and get ready for the next short. And it can be a huge disservice to the movies when this movie resets and gets into much more of like a crime saga. For like 20 minutes, I was like, fuck, like this movie is completely, it's like, it's fallen to pieces right before my eyes. How frustrating. But at least we had that great first act where I was having so much fun. It just takes a while for the movie to regroup. And when I'm reading here on Wikipedia, this movie was shot a couple years ago, but apparently there was quite a battle between the director and the producers before the movie got released. There's a lengthy post-production process, and it says here that Patterson faced creative clashes with his producers before his vision ultimately won out. So what we're seeing, I think, is more or less what he wanted to put on the screen. But who knows? Maybe the producers had a point. Maybe the producers were saying to themselves, this movie is 2 hours and 10 minutes long. There's a 2-hour version that's just airtight, where you just tighten all the screws and it's just perfect. But Andrew Patterson, I think, flaws and all, or warts and all, this movie's going to make quite an impact on people. But I do worry about, is anybody going to fucking see this thing? Is anybody even aware of this? Because I spend a couple hours a day reading entertainment news and watching trailers and that sort of thing. I had no idea this movie even existed until a couple of days ago. And thankfully, this is why I'm always talking about how you need to have great movie posters for your movies. If your posters suck, they don't make a good first impression. And like, the poster can be the first handshake with the audience. And you would think in the digital age, we're obviously going to see something on social media or YouTube before we see it in the theater. But I saw an actual physical, big, giant, like huge fucking poster in the lobby to the Angelica, and I was, what is that? Oh, okay, let's take it for a spin. And luckily, the poster that I saw, which I'll show you right here, was pretty cool, and it caught my eye. If the poster had been terrible, I probably never would have seen this movie and been deprived of my favorite movie of 2026 so far. But just as a way of wrapping up this video, I just want to say I was relieved while watching this movie, because if you love movies, as you get older, those moments of discovery come less and less often. Whether you love old movies or you love keeping up with new releases, or a bit of both, just like when you're like 18 to like 23, it's like every day that goes by, like, oh my God, I just discovered a new masterpiece and a new filmmaker that I'm obsessed with. But as you get older, obviously you get more cynical, you get a little bit more blasé, a little bit more kind of dismissive of something that's new, and you just get that feeling of discovery less and less often. But with this movie, I've discovered a new acting talent that I'm looking forward to seeing more of, Angelina LookingGlass, and more importantly, I've discovered a new writer-director where I can get very fired up, and who knows, maybe it'll take 2-3 movies before he delivers something as good as this again, or who knows, maybe his next movie will be even better. But Andrew Patterson, you've got my full undivided attention, and I hope that this movie will find the audience it deserves, and I hope that at a minimum it can generate some awards chatter or box office, or a bit of both. But as somebody who has a YouTube channel devoted to film culture, it was a pleasure and a privilege singing the praises of the Rivals of Amziah King today, and I hope I've managed to put this movie on a few more people's radar. And yeah, it's the late summer surprise that you always hope is going to come, but you never know in what form that might come. Like last year was Weapons. That was the late summer surprise. I don't think this movie's going to make the kind of money that Weapons made, because kind of neo-westerns or shit-kicker, beekeeper, organized crime movies are not necessarily like everybody's go-to. But who knows? Maybe people will develop like a real genuine hunger for this kind of movie moving forward. But I think at this point, I've said enough. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, hitting that notification bell, becoming a member, but more importantly than anything, consider going to see this movie next week when it goes into wide release. But thank you so much for watching. I greatly appreciate it, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.